Normally, getting into the Setup menu on a Vario touch panel involves using a blunt pin or something similar to push the button on the top of the panel. But you can create a Setup button on the panel itself. For this project, I'm going to start with a blank panel design, and I want a logo in the corner of the screen to be my Setup button. I don't have any graphics in the design at the moment, so I'll start off by importing the logo that I want to use. The next step is just to create a button roughly the right size, and then add the logo I imported earlier as my bitmap image. I didn't use a specific size of logo, so I'll make sure that it's scaled to fit the button. As I'm using a PNG image, I don't want any background color, so I'll make the background transparent. Next, I'll just move the logo into the right position. Once that's in place, I need to set the button up to trigger the setup page, and this is done by using channel port 0, which is the setup port. Under the channel code setting, I can now select a page flip to the protected setup menu. One point worth noting is that the default touch style for a button is active touch. This means that the graphic itself is the button. Now, as this graphic has a lot of space on a transparent background, I'm going to change the touch style to bounding box. This means that any part of the box I drew activates the button. Once my design is saved and transferred to the panel, I'll give it a quick test to make sure it's working. And there you have it. When I press the Harman logo, I get into the setup page, with the password of course. Now that works fine as a basic option, but it does run the risk of someone pushing the button and maybe not realizing what they've done, or of course getting into the setup mode if they happen to know the password. So how can I make this a bit more secret? Well, the first thing I need to do is change the button so that it doesn't just trigger the setup page straight away. I'll do this by setting the channel port back to 1 and adding in a channel code. The next step is to give the button a name so that it's easily recognizable in MUSE Automator. In this case, I'll call it Secret Setup Button. This button now behaves the same way as any other button on the panel. Once the panel design has been saved and transferred, I can move on to the automator flow that I'm going to use to control the setup function. As I've just made changes to the panel design, the first thing I need to do is upload the new panel file to my automator project. And after this, I'll move straight on to my new flow. Triggering the setup page from Automator is pretty straightforward. I just add a UI control node so I know when the button's been pushed. I don't need to set any feedback on the button because I don't want it to look obvious that the button has been pushed. Next, I'll use a command node to send a command to the panel. I'll call this setup mode so I know what it does. Now there's no way to trigger anything on port 0 the same way I did directly from the panel design, but I can send a setup command to port 1. The command I need to send is STP for setup, and don't forget the caret symbol before the command. Now I'll just join these two nodes together, deploy the project, and give it a try. Now at the moment, I've got exactly the same functionality as before. Push the button and get straight into the setup page. This time though, I'm in control of the functionality, and what I want is for the user to have to hold the button for 3 seconds before the setup page is triggered. On the face of it, this is pretty simple. I can just add a 3-second delay after the button's been pushed. The problem with this is that you don't actually need to hold the button for 3 seconds. Even if I release the button, the command gets sent 3 seconds later. To make this work, I need to know when the button's been released, so I'll create a new button, this time looking for a button release rather than a button push. And my button release needs to stop the timer. Now, one of the functions of the delay node is that the timer it uses will stop if it receives a reset message, so I'll use a change node to set this up. This change node only needs to generate message.reset. The value of the reset message doesn't actually matter in this case, so I can either set it to true or I can just leave it blank. When everything's connected up, a button push starts the timer and a button release stops it. If we take a look at how this behaves from the touch panel, when I press the logo button, you can see the delay node starts its timer, but if I release it, the timer stops. If I hold the button for longer than 3 seconds, however, the setup command is sent to the panel, which goes into setup mode. This now means that any technician who knows the process can get into the setup mode without having to access the tiny setup button. But it also means that day-to-day users won't do this accidentally.